What's up everybody, my name is Kelvar and today we're going to be going over some jungling basics. Now, before I get started, this video is not guaranteed to blow your mind with next level strats, but it is guaranteed to give you a basic understanding of tracking the enemy jungler. So let's get started. As a jungler, map awareness is key, as you are the one potential variable on the map. You could be everywhere and nowhere, which speaks to the strengths of the jungling role. Do your job well, and no one knows where you are, but you, more or less, know where everyone else is. One of the key components of being a good jungler is not only being able to pull off successful ganks and control objectives, but also being able to maintain or track the enemy jungler. Now this concept is much more complicated than it may sound at first. One of the most important parts of tracking the enemy jungler is to know their starting position to estimate their pathing. If I give you some junglers, can you assume where they might start? Lee Sin, Amumu, Hecarim, or even Vi? You could safely assume that Amumu or Hecarim might start at blue because they're so mana intensive early, but what about Lee Sin and Vi? If you're not able to get a ward in the enemy jungle before the first buff spawn, don't worry, there's other ways to guess where the jungler might have started. Did bot lane show up late to lane? The jungler probably started bot lane, or vice versa for top. Let's take a look at Kha'Zix and Lee Sin's jungle path one more time. For the sake of the demonstration, let's say Lee Sin is going to be the enemy jungler. We can see that both junglers started on the top side of the jungle. If you know that Lee Sin started at his red side, then you can pretty much assume that he will be bot side around the same time you will, either looking for a gank or objective control. Having this knowledge allows us to set up a potential counter gank in the bot lane. And then after we finish our second buff, we hit level 3, so we are ideally power spiked for this fight. If bot lane did their job, then that river brush should be warded and you should be all set for this counter gank. Now this is just one of many variations, but knowing where the enemy jungler started could set you up for potential ganks or invades later in the game. Now that you have a basic idea of where the enemy jungler might have started, how do you keep track of them? This map shows a very basic offensive ward placement for tracking enemy junglers. Notice how they're placed in high traffic locations, pretty much guaranteeing you will see the enemy jungler at some point. Now for simplicity's sake, I'm going to keep this video from the blue side's perspective. Let's take a more in-depth look at some of these wards. As you can see, I did not place my ward at blue buff, I placed it at the intersection. I placed it here specifically because 1, it is the quote busiest section of the blue side jungle where the jungler nearly always pass through. 2, it's not a super common ward, and 3, it is not in view of the pink ward if their blue brush is pinked. If you're looking at the minimap as much as you should, then you should almost always see the jungler at some point with this ward. Moving on to the most common ward for tracking, the Raptors Ward, the most obvious offensive ward for jungle invades. Now make sure your placement of this ward is precise. As you can see, the vision I get from my placement allows me to see a single raptor. This gives me the knowledge that not only the raptors are up, but the enemy jungler could be on the other side of the jungle and or when he is doing the raptor camp. Yes, this location is highly known and is very likely to be swept frequently, however it's still an ideal place for a ward since it is such a high traffic area for the entire enemy team. And now for the Reddit famous ward placement, behind the red buff. This is the famous or the classic pink ward order of longevity, whatever the heck they call it, location that is actually very infrequently checked. Like the Raptors ward, this placement is very important. If you place it here, you get complete vision of the red buff pretty much, so you'll know when the enemy jungler passed through his red buff, is doing the red buff, as well as going towards his Krugs or top lane. While it has become much more prevalent in the recent years, you would be amazed how many junglers I still catch off guard with a pink ward behind their own red buff. It's not as high traffic as the Raptor ward, but it's still a great basis for tracking the jungler. For instance, if you see the enemy jungler on this ward going to their Krugs or their top lane, you are pretty much completely open to either counter jungle their blue side, gank bottom lane, or take dragon. Or, depending upon your position, you could set up a counter gank in the top lane. Now let's zoom out and look at these other wards. These yellow wards cover nearly all areas where the enemy jungler could leave his jungle aside from dashes and blast cones. Keeping these up with your team is a great way to prevent the enemy jungler from making any aggressive movements, as you already know where he might be coming from. Yes, I know what you're thinking. Gee, Mr. Kelvar, my team never wards. How can I keep this vision up myself? The short answer is that you can't. You only have 3 wards and a pink ward down at a time, which makes all of this vision impossible for one person. However, you can definitely get these cheeky deep wards in high traffic areas, which will give you some idea of the enemy jungler. What's important to note here is that it's not only enough to see the enemy jungler, but you need to track the enemy jungler. My point is, where did you see him? What direction was he going? Where do you think he's going next? Did he have any buffs? Did he buy any new items? Is it safe for me to invade? Can we get an objective? Can I set up a counter gank? These are all questions that should enter your mind after you spot the enemy jungler on the minimap. For example, if you see the enemy jungler running toward his blue buff side around 7 minutes, you can assume he's going to either take the blue buff as its likely respawn, or give it away to his mid laner. Or, if you see the enemy jungler top at 7 minutes, and you know he started blue, then it might be time for an invade so you can snag the blue for yourself. All of this information you gain from wards leads you to more questions that you need to answer yourself as a jungler. Decision making is a key aspect of jungling in League of Legends as a whole, but we'll go over that in another video. But what if, after all of this, a lane lost super hard, gave up first tower, and now the enemy got to enter your jungle? Don't worry, there's still some very simple defensive wards that can prevent the enemy jungler from roaming free. Let's start with the most common. This defensive ward in River Brush is the most common and yet most effective place for a ward, since it is a very likely place for the enemy jungler to invade on the bot side of the map. Couple this with a ward or a pink ward behind your red buff and at Tri-Brush, and the enemy jungler has nearly no way to get in there without being seen. Now, the same concept applies to defense as it did with offense. Warding entrances to your jungle will allow your team to collapse on or prevent the enemy jungler from getting too much of a footing in your jungle. Another one of my personal favorite wards is in front of Baron. Placing a ward here gives you maximum vision of your jungle entrance, as well as the possibility of the enemy team doing Baron or Rift Herald. If you make an invisible line between these two walls, it makes for the ideal placement of the Baron pit. You can also place a ward closer to top lane while covering your jungle entrance if you want more vision focused around top lane, or if Rift or Baron hasn't spawned yet. Now on to the last ward I'll be covering in detail, the brush between mid and blue buff. If you can place a pink ward there in the correct spot, you get pretty decent vision of the river. And it is safer than having a pink in the river brush due to the likelihood the enemy jungler is to walk through the river brush and then instantly clear it. While you don't get the optimal vision like you would in the river brush, you do get all the vision you need to stay safe if you're aware of the minimap, and it's very unlikely to be cleared out early game. Now, it is true, some of these wards early game are the responsibility of the laners, such as the Tri-Brush or the river lane brush. But with your offensive vision you lay down, theoretically no lane should feel pressure of being ganked, as you will always know where the enemy jungler is. I also highly suggest pinging once and then typing to your team, as even high elo players fail to look at the minimap from time to time. Jungling, in my opinion, is one of the most difficult positions to play in League of Legends, but with proper ward coverage and good pathing, you can easily control the early game and prevent their jungler from creating any leads for the enemy team. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, I would very much appreciate a like or subscribe so you could be alerted of when I upload new videos. I'll be making another video for jungling decision making later, but for now, I wish you luck in your solo queue endeavors. Hopefully this video helped you understand some jungling basics. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.